probably do, because it's exciting to have everybody who we have up on the stage with us. And I also wanted to give a special welcome to our partner CKGSB and also our group from the Silicon Valley Innovation and Investment Leadership Week, Tech-Driven Business Innovation. Took me a minute to remember that. So nice to see you all. It's really nice to see the students. We made sure we had tons of chairs today, so if you see somebody who's sitting on the side, tell them to move up. Nice to see you all here, and good luck, and great finding it. Not the easiest place to find. Next week we will be back in the Anderson Auditorium for the film screening of Savvy. But this week we are fortunate to have two students with us, Isabella and Tan, who are going to introduce our speakers for this evening. Just as a reminder, what we'll be doing tonight, after we have our speaker introduction, is probably not covering more than 3 of these bullet points, if I know our speakers correctly. We'll kind of set the stage for what's happening and what has happened with these 2 individuals in terms of innovation, talking a little bit about what they can remember from their college and post-college journey, talk about the innovation revolution, resilience, customer focus, the role of the pivot, dealing with conflict, which of course is a big theme for us this semester, and also the current focus. But probably the most important thing is that we're going to try to stop our conversation on the stage with Ken Singer at about 5:50, so that you all can be sure to be able to get your questions in. So you should have at least 30 minutes, if not more, for questions. Speaking of Ken Singer, I will be introducing him right now. Actually, I'm going to actually have you take a seat. If you haven't met Ken Singer already, he's the managing director for the Starja Center. He's an entrepreneur. He is an innovator. He is integral in our summer program that we have often in Portugal. And he's also one of the best moderators that I know. So please welcome Ken Singer.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So, hello everyone, welcome, welcome. My name is Isabella, and I actually came to Cal as an international student, mainly for the explicit purpose of the innovation and technology that it boasts. And the speaker I'm about to introduce exactly exemplifies that. Now, Marc Tarpenning is actually a California native born in Sacramento and a Berkeley Cal grad who obtained a BA in computer science in 1985. Now, after graduating, Marc went on to a series of adventures and businesses, all the while living by one single principle: finding an interesting problem and coming up with a solution that makes the world a better place. This could be seen early on in Marc's career, because due to the constant travel to Saudi Arabia for his work with Textron, Marc recognized the frustration behind constantly lugging around heavy books. And in partnership with Marc Eberhard, a fellow engineer at the time, they founded NuvoMedia in 1997 and built one of the very first e-readers called the Rocketbook. 3 years later, they sold the company for a measly $187 million. In 2003, once again, a problem was identified, this time in the form of oil and its environmental effects. Then the momentous happened, as Marc and Martin collaborated again and founded Tesla. This company was set out to disrupt the car industry by building high-end electric vehicles. And following its founding, Elon Musk led the company's Series A financing round in February 2004. Now Tesla dominates the electric car market at $53 billion in revenue, with the likes of the Model S, Model X, and Model 3, with over 99,000 people employed. After the first round of funding, Marc served as the Chief Financial Officer and VP of Electrical Engineering until 2008. After his departure, Marc has held many, many titles, including an entrepreneur in residence, a consultant, a mentor, a speaker, and a 2-term publicly elected school board member. Most recently, Marc is a partner at Spiro Venture, an early-stage venture capital firm in pursuit of sustainable abundance. And here, Marc works with the vision of helping entrepreneurs bring about radical change in old industries by creating sustainable products and experiences that are significantly better than the old ways of doing things. And with that, I would like to welcome Marc to the stage with a round of applause and thank him for his attendance today.
Hello everybody, my name is Tan, and when I was 4 years old, I told my mom I wanted to design cars, which is a big reason why I want to introduce Martin Eberhard here today. Martin grew up just 15 minutes north of where we are today in Kensington, California, right below the Berkeley Hills. He received his BS in computer engineering and MS in electrical engineering in 1983 from UIUC. In 1987, Martin co-founded Network Computing Devices, where he served as chief engineer through its IPO in 1992. And in the 90s, Martin met his best friend, Marc Tarpenning, and quickly bonded over many games of Magic the Gathering. Together, the duo founded NuvoMedia in 1996 and sold commercial handheld e-readers before being acquired for $187 million in the year 2000. Using his experience from previous successful startups, he wanted to apply his Silicon Valley know-how to change the automotive industry due to his love for sports cars and his concern for oil imports and global warming. Once again, the dynamic duo partnered up and co-founded Tesla Motors in 2003, with Martin being its first CEO. After Tesla, Martin served on many C-level and director roles for companies such as Volkswagen and SF Motors. To this day, the dynamic duo continue to invest in interesting and meaningful early-stage startups. If you look up Martin Eberhard on LinkedIn, his current occupation is enjoying life, retired, full-time, and worldwide. Golden Bears, let's give a warm welcome to Martin Eberhard.
I think we're all mic'd up. Great. Yeah, let me make sure you're mic'd good. Yeah, so good. So, all right.
I want to make sure. Sometimes it's hard to hear in the back.
Yeah, can you guys hear us in the back?
I hope so.
Yeah?
All those hiding in the back that you didn't come forward.
Yeah, raise your hand if you can't hear us. Okay, yes. All right, there is a bit of an echo with maybe that's the mic, I'm not sure. So, we asked you guys to kind of put together a few slides actually, right, about just your journey and so.
Oh, can you hold on?
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry to do this, but I'm having a little bit of a technical issue, Sergio. I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
can hear everybody.
There's just a little bit of
There's
a feedback.
It's just right at the edge of feedback.
Can you turn your off? Is that okay? Better? Just as a test.
Anna's on it.
Yeah, but it's still
Fantastic.
echo.
All right. I take it.
Okay, well, all right. So I think it's just because there's so many mics, it might be a lot of bad speakers. All right. Yeah. So we are the Center for Technology, Entrepreneurship and Technology. Well, we're struggling with the technology part of that right now, but ironically. But you know, maybe we can start by just taking a look at the journey you've taken through, you know, your education all the way to where you are now. You know, we did a bio, but how would you describe the journey that you've been on since your college days?
I guess I would echo the way that Mark was introduced. It's trying to find something that's worth doing. I think when I graduated from school, I took a job at a startup company in Silicon Valley, not knowing what a startup company was, not knowing what stock was, if you could imagine. And I took a job there because I liked the vibe, I liked the feeling of the people. And we were making something really boring. We were making computer terminals. The next startup company I did was
So why did you choose a startup over a big company? Because you went to Illinois. Illinois is well known for its engineering. You know, it's had early fingerprints on all of the web stuff as well. Why did you choose to go towards a smaller company? Because most of these students are educated.
So I did a lot of on-campus interviews. I interviewed at big companies and small companies here and there around the country, and I got quite a few job offers. Sorry about that feedback.
She's going up. We're gonna do something from up there.
I didn't take the highest paying offer I got. I got one of those sort of low end. And what I liked when they interviewed at the company, I actually went and visited most of these companies. I liked the feeling of the way the work was. I liked the attitude of the people working there, particularly in the engineering department. I liked the feeling of empowerment that the employees had. The bigger companies, you know, you work on a very small thing, part of a much larger project, and not much job satisfaction. Whereas at my first company, within the first 4 months of my being there, I proposed a new product to the company. could persuade the CEO of the company to let me do that product, and I designed basically the whole thing myself right out of school, which I think, so my thought that the vibe was correct for that, at least for my personality.
So did you take a job right out of college as well?
I had a totally different path, yeah, actually. So when I graduated Berkeley, I had been doing some consulting. So, you have to think back. It was 40 years ago, which I'm actually a little traumatized by because I was actually on campus the other day and I realized that it was 40 years almost to the day where the first time I stepped foot on Berkeley's campus. And I actually texted a picture of the campaign link to my high school buddy that I came to Berkeley with and said, brace yourself, 40 years. And he's like, oh my God, that's what I'd say. But, so it was, the Stone Age, well, not literally the Stone Ages, but it felt like it. And so when I graduated, so during that time, anyone who knew anything about computers, and we were early, my friend and I, that I came here with, were really early computer people. And we knew all the computer people. The major had like 100 people in it total or something. It was, it was insane.
Just to butt in for a moment, when I was in college, I was the only kid in my entire dorm who had a computer. I was the only one.
Yeah, well, I think we were too. I mean, my friend and I. I mean, it's like,
What were most kids majoring? Was it mostly econ or?
who knows? It was something else. I mean, like,
Today it is computer science.
I know. Our graduation at Berkeley for computer science was on card tables out in front of the Campanile. Because there was 100 of us graduating, and there was, we had like 150 guests kind of thing, and it was small.
But that's also what made me major interested.
Oh, it was great. It was great. But the point of that is that because I had some knowledge about computers, I was in high demand, so I was doing consulting. I was working on projects for employers the whole time. And I was so burned out that when I graduated, the last thing I wanted to do was get a job. Like I'd been doing, like that was the last thing. So my friends and I went to Europe, and because I'd never been to Europe, we were tooling around Europe. And I checked in with my parents by payphone. It was one of those things you put in coins, and then you called. This weird, big cell phone. Yeah, like a cell phone that that's stuck, in its space. And my dad said, "Hey, this guy keeps calling me, and you need to call him." So anyway, somebody I worked for, and he offered me a job. It was only going to take a few months. It was going to pay super, super well. It was in Boston, and I only needed to do it for 3 months. They were stuck in this technical problem, which I happened to be weirdly an expert in, so it was like perfectly matched. So I flew back from Europe after a month bumming around. And it took 6 years to get that 3-month project done, by the way.
That involved moving to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and that involved Saudi Arabia and Alabama, and it was super fun. But that was my, so I was not planning on getting a job at all, at least for a while.
Right. So I want to translate part of your story to students, because you mentioned your dad told you somebody called. So back when we were young, there were no cell phones. So people called your home, left messages with your parents, and then you had to return phone calls. So very different from today where you just get direct phone. Actually, you guys don't talk on phones. It's all text messages today, right?
And to give you some color to that, because I was doing business work, I had an answering machine. And I knew lots of students here, so presumably early adopters, that when I got that answering machine, they would refuse to leave a message because they were never going to leave a voicemail didn't exist. They're never going to leave a message on a machine that was so impersonal and so horrible. I would never do that.
Yeah, very common during my time as well. It's a beepers that we use. Yeah. So technology has changed a lot, but so you didn't have necessarily a plan.
No,
And it doesn't sound like you did either. And I just want to point, because they are pushed to have plans. How many of you guys already have plans on what you want to do with your career? Okay, a lot of them. How many of you are getting pressured by somebody to have a plan about your career? Yeah, so it's...
So I think it's fine to have a plan, just don't stick to it.
Yeah.
I agree. Having a plan gives you a sense of control. but also you need to be able to deviate. I think that's going to be a theme in this conversation, yeah?
Right, exactly. I think, do what you really love, and you'll find a way. You'll make a living out of it. I mean, yeah. So I remember I was only shortly into my first job, and I was late at night working on some problem. I'd been there, I was like the only one left in the office. I had been working on this particular piece of circuitry I was designing for hours and hours and hours, and I realized how much fun I was having, and I thought to myself, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. I would do it for free if they just,
Right.
So I enjoyed it that much.
So you were making choices based on what brought you joy, what interested you. Like you were pursuing the things that were.
That's right, and the joy comes from partly that I was actually pretty good at it too. So I had a real feeling I was actually accomplishing something.
Yeah, and how did you? Because you said you had a 3-month project that ballooned into a
6 years, yeah.
That sounds like a consultant right there, because that's how
that's kind of what I was doing. It was super interesting though, because it was technically difficult at the time. I mean, now it would be ridiculous to even think about it being complicated, but it was, a few hundred computers all that work together, in the middle of in a remote location. Now it's Riyadh, or it was Riyadh then, but it's the airport there, which was a ways away from the city. And I loved traveling, and I loved the whole experience was actually really great. I got to see 27 countries on other people's money, which was awesome. Always stayed at really nice hotels, and it was the same deal. I thought, this is great. Like, I'm in Zurich again, and someone's paying me to be here, which was fantastic.
Okay, so when did that change? When did that being awesome turned into I want to do something else?
So after 6 years of continuously orbiting the planet, I had round-the-world tickets, because it's set from here to Saudi Arabia. It's sort of 11 and a half time zones away, so it's 11 time zones, it's really kind of in the middle. So it's about as far as you can get, and I wanted to see more places than just hopping to Europe and then to Saudi. And I asked if I could get round-the-world tickets instead, and the CFO character, the controller, took me aside and he said, "You're doing such a great job, and I really appreciate. We want you to be happy, and I think we can accommodate you for that." And I thought, this company's great. When I got the tickets, I realized that they were like a third cheaper to go around the world because it was less desirable, it was perfect. So no wonder the guy was thrilled. Anyway, so then I just routed myself literally around the planet, every 12 weeks or whatever. Super, super neat. And if you do that enough times, you kind of can't handle getting into an airport again.
I'm there right now with what I do. It's interesting, the thing that I will take away from that story is you called him the CFO character. So if you've ever worked in industry, that's kind of it, because every CFO is kind of the same in big companies. It's just the same character. That's how you describe that. Totally. That's a real experience.
Yeah, it was a huge company.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was because I could, in fact, for a while, I couldn't even, I would go down to LA and I just have to drive because I actually had a meeting one time in LA and I said, I'll just drive. And they were like, it's 6 hours. And I can't go to the airport. I just can't do it.
So something changed in you when the same experiences started feeling different, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to have more of a social life that made sense. And, it was...
And how about you? So you're pursuing a different path. It sounds like you're pursuing passion.
I was working in Silicon Valley in the same company, and I had moved up the ranks from just an engineer to a project leader to eventually a higher position where I was managing a bunch of people. And there's a couple of things that I actually prefer engineering more than managing. I've done both, but I was getting tired of the politics of the managing side of things. I wanted to get back into engineering. And the company was moving in a direction I was less interested in. And I had an idea for a product I thought this company ought to make. It was kind of in the portfolio, but I could not convince management that this was a good idea. But I was enough convinced of it that I quit and with some friends started a new company to make that product, which actually was successful. So, yeah.
That's actually, from what I understand, that's also the same story with WhatsApp. It's like the team that wanted to do a project at Yahoo in the 80s.
I think it's super common.
Right? And so there's this theme, right? It's like you believe something is possible and you want to work on it. You can't get people to completely sign off on it. So you go and break off.
So there's a kind of a famous book on that exact subject. The book is The Soul of a New Machine, which is the guy from DEC that went off to start Data General. It's the exact same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that and I think that's actually going to be a theme that's coming back to automotive, having to convince people.
Right. But I think, I mean, the theme that I think we've both seen in our careers is as we've gotten more into our field and as we've grown up a bit, what we consider to be a worthwhile project got bigger and bigger. So my first thing, I just want to do something interesting. The next thing I want to do something interesting to more than just the people who did the technology I did. And then eventually you want to do something that actually made the world really a better place. And this is just, broadening your horizon, exactly. And that's partly just because you just know more about the world, and then also you gather more skills, so you're able to reach even farther.
And so how did you guys get to the next step? Because it sounds like, is that where you guys converged? It's like you got hired at the consultant.
So he mentioned his friend that he came to Berkeley with, and that guy actually worked where I worked. That's how I met Mark, through that common friend.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so we became first social friends, and I just remember we would meet when I think at New Year's for a party, we'd meet once a year. I'd see him, he'd fly in from Riyadh or wherever, and I remember always, every time we would sit in the corner and have a conversation about politics or economics or something like that, and every time I walked away thinking I learned something, this guy taught me something. And it was,
It was totally mutual. Like I was Mark going to be there?
And eventually, as we started actually starting companies, I still think of Mark as kind of my straight man. I come up with wacky, crazy ideas, and if I can't convince Mark, it's probably actually not a good idea. And so, I mean, the fact that I could convince you to start a car company was actually pretty phenomenal.
That was right on the edge. Yeah, that was good.
Before because I think there's one step between, right? You guys have did you guys do the e-reader?
Well, we did some consulting together. I think our first time we actually worked together was we worked at some crushingly boring company making disk drives, but we were just consultants together at this company.
Yeah.
And although the disk drives were dull as can be, working with Mark was fun.
That's a little unfair. Disk drives are actually super.
Can you explain what a disk drive is?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's the spinning whirly things that used to store data, and they still store data. If you don't want to store a lot of data, you still need the spinning whirly things. But now everything is solid state for the smallest things, like up to a terabyte or two. But if you want something big storage, you got to have spinning whirly.
Okay, so usually it was fun, but I just remember that when we went to DiskCon, this was a Silicon Valley conference all about disk drives. It was crushingly dull.
Well, it was so the actual the spinning whirly thing is really complicated. It's got a mechanical layer that gets ever simpler because software is able to fix it. So things get sloppier and sloppier and cheaper. But the reason why you can buy, a 100 terabyte or drive for $400 or $100 or whatever it is because software has fixed all that. So the mechanics is dirt simple because the software plays all the games to keep the head on track. The data coming off the head is so weak that the data is barely even there. But the software is able to fix that by just guessing at the right bits all the time, and you're guessing 100% of the time.
So this is what I mean about something that's technically super interesting, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not something you talk about
At parties, nobody cares at parties.
But this is I think a good jumping off point because you guys are both engineering technical people. You guys get into the minutia and you enjoy the minutia, right? But to your point, then you have to ask your question. This is technically interesting to me, but is this consequential to anyone else, right?
Well, totally, although I would also say that there's an attention span aspect. So disk drives, the first time I worked on a disk drive project, it was super interesting. I was learning all kinds of brilliant stuff. The second time I was really good at it, so then they want you to do more. The third time was when we went to DiskCon, and they're all the spinning whirly things are the same. They just there's like different issues around it, but they're pretty much the same. And DiskCon was so crushingly boring that, well, we both thought that we might just forget to breathe, like it was just going to be the end of it. And there was this espresso cart that literally saved the day. We saw this
I
as
think we went
Western
on our
Art.
hands and knees on the way to it.
It was, yeah, it literally, and that was when we decided that was the end of the disk drive.
So
Part of our career.
I mean, that's
was like-
right to our thinking about the ebook company.
So connect the dots to that because it's not obvious that you go from disk drives to the first commercially really
Well,
viable-
these guys are just, I mean, it's all electronics, it's all the same, right? But this was at the time where portable electronics were just becoming possible. So we were early on being those nerdy guys at the coffee shop with our laptops and our cell phones that flipped open, and our Palm Pilots that had our calendars. I mean, we were doing that early on and sitting around thinking about what we wanted to do next. And we're looking at these very things sitting on our table at the coffee shop and thinking, actually, the technology is now there, perhaps, to make something like an ebook. We threw this out there that, the batteries were just getting good enough, that power electronics was getting to be low enough power.
And was this just a technical conversation or was this, I really want to start a company and we're looking for an idea?
Well, that was the second thing.
Yes.
It's not just that we want to start a company. We want to start a company that was interesting.
Yeah.
And we are both readers. We both have, we trade books. We have houses full of books. And we also traveled enough to realize that bringing a bunch of books with you and traveling is kind of a drag. And I mean, I was able to home run. I mean, for my own part, I got to go spend several days in the house of my favorite author. It was just amazing. I got to know all of the publishers in New York. I knew most of the agents. By first name, I could call up like Richard Curtis in New York and he'd take the call. It was, from that perspective, it was a home run.
Right. So go back to the decision to do it though, because you didn't know that it was going to be.
Well, of course not.
Yeah,
But I knew it would be interesting.
Yeah, but that was part of the decision. We wanted to do something interesting.
Yes.
And we thought, well, it would be so cool to meet all these authors and these publishers in New York City. And, that was, it was going to be different than disk drives. It was going to be something actually that was really engaging, both technically because it was hard, but also it had this sort of bigger focus on something that we thought would be really, really interesting.
And I want to underscore that a bit because I think I hear from a lot of my students, I just want to be successful. I want to, in my career, I want to do something that's going to be a success. I hear this word success and I ask them, explain what success means, and then it gets quiet because they haven't thought of what that would look like.
Success in itself shouldn't be a goal. It should be something that comes from achieving the goals you want to achieve.
I agree. I think, though, if you haven't really failed that much, you don't have a sense of success or failure, and I think a lot of our students are kind of at that knowledge horizon, right? So I think what you guys have been talking about, focusing on what you find interesting, right? That seems to have led you guys to success, after success in your life.
Well, and I mean, there's a couple of steps along the way that we have these ideas. For example, with the ebook, and we'll talk about this on other things too, but for the ebook, what it came down to is would people actually read on a screen? And screens back in the mid-90s were nothing like your iPad today, or nothing like it, or not nearly as good. And we knew that this product would live or die by the screens. Could we make something that people would actually be willing to read on? So long before we even started the company, we shook the bushes and everybody who made screens, we went to look at the screens. And we saw a lot of ones that were not good enough.
Okay, so let's stop. So you guys said, okay, we want to start a company together. We also want to do something that's interesting, right? This is all the decision tree here, guys. So, and then they go, okay, we're readers, we like reading, we think there's a problem area that we might be able to work on, and then you look for people who are already solving it.
No. There's pieces of the technology that are allowing us to do that.
Right.
So nickel metal hydride batteries existed. They got really good. Lithium ion came out right after that. That was our second generation product. And that had enough energy. Low power compute structures were coming out. Solid state storage for flash memory has just come out.
So if you had tried to start this company a year before, it would
A
not.
few years we couldn't. They wouldn't.
Yeah, the technology wouldn't.
Technology did not exist.
I think whenever you come up with a new idea like this, there comes a point where you start off with this grand idea of what you want to do, and then you need to get realistic. And the realistic thing for me is to look at what I'm going to do and be honest with myself about if I'm going to fail, where am I going to fail? Which piece of technology is going to kill me? That's where we focused on the screen. We said
Because that was the thing we couldn't control. That's the hardest thing. Because at the
So
time,
how did that come about? Did you guys have a conversation? What is the hardest thing we need to solve?
yeah.
Okay, so take note, guys, because it's not just.
I think when you're solving any sufficiently complex problem, that's the way you do it. You think about the problem, you learn everything you can, you come up with a proposed architecture. You say, I'm going to do it this way, and then you need to look at it honestly and say, where are the places that are going to fail? What are the ideas in my architecture that if these don't work, the whole idea is no good?
But it's not even a bad thing, though. I'm
It's
saying
not
you guys were in constant conversation,
Oh, yeah.
probably with other people to try to understand.
Yeah, and at that
the problems
time,
that you-
it's still probably the case, is that the world's best displays were all coming out of really Japan, although we also, I think, went to Korea and Taiwan.
wasn't good enough.
Right.
And Taiwan too, yeah.
And Taiwan, yeah. So we
So gathered information.
yeah, well, so we actually flew there because you can't, these are things, there was nothing you could buy. There was nothing like that. But all of these companies have what they're working on.
In their labs.
In their labs. So if you go there, if you make all the right calls and, sit there and massage the supply chain, you get to see what they're working on. And in that process, we found a screen that was good enough. It was different than anything else we'd seen. It had a high enough contrast ratio. It had a high enough bit or pixel density that you could actually render characters.
It was low enough power.
Low enough power, and had
It was
everything.
kind of like perfect.
Well, it wasn't perfect. It was we would, at the time, even then, we said this is barely good enough, is the way we described it.
Yeah. But it was good enough.
But it was good. It was on the correct side of that knife.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just what year was this?
97.
No.
No.
96.
96 maybe.
Okay,
yeah.
so when was Google kind of really a thing? Later.
Yeah.
So you could not find it. So most of our students, when you ask them a question,
You just Google that.
You just Google it, right?
No, this was in the days of Alta Vista.
Yeah, Alta Vista was on
Yeah,
it.
so we're dating ourselves.
In fact, one of Martin's friends was some of the earliest money into Google, and he had told us about this company Google, and when the .com catastrophe happened, or I don't know, it was it was a .com catastrophe. I happened to run into him at a burrito shop, and I was talking to him, and I said, the one thing he said, I really like this Google thing, just because he was shutting down all those portfolio companies because they couldn't raise money, and I said, you can't let Google die because, that's the one thing I'm using. And he's like, oh yeah, no, that one's going to work out. I'm really sure that one's going to work out.
That's the first time I heard the expression "beating money."
Yes.
Because there were like 40 other search engines at the time. The reason I bring this up is that you guys had to do foundational research here. You could not Google it. There was that verb did not exist, right?
And even now, if you wanted to find the best displays, you would Google stuff and you see who the manufacturers are. But you would go to Asia and you would, you'd go to LG, you'd go to Sharp, and you would shake all the same trees, pretty much. LG probably first.
But you have to roll up the sleeve. There's no
You gotta
kind of
go.
offloading this into just kind of, getting a search engine to give you answers. You have to actually do the basic
So,
work.
if I can jump ahead a little bit to Tesla, we knew from the beginning that we were not going to be able to, as a startup company, design the whole car ourselves. That's not possible. We needed a partner. And we used Google for that. We Googled, I did a tremendous amount of Googling, including a good partner for our first car was Lotus. Okay, that's just getting an idea of who we could come out. I had listed about 4 companies in order of who I thought were potential partners. And then we went to the LA Auto Show in 2002, and forced ourselves upon the people at the Lotus booth until they agreed to let us come and pitch them in England in order to make us go away and leave them alone.
But you guys actually went in and you had to talk to these people.
Oh, we just hung out at the booth and had these little velvet ropes, and they have all that little. Yeah, because they only auto show you. So the reason why Martin had found Lotus so interesting was they were an impedance match and that they made small volume cars, but also they had an engineering group that specialized in helping other companies build things, and they had a manufacturing. They had a setup that they could actually, in theory, make a car for someone else. They did that for other people. So we knew. I mean, it was like perfect. But we were just 2 random guys showing up at the LA Auto Show.
And more than that, we were wanting to make an electric car at a time when nobody believed in electric cars anymore.
So why? Why did you guys want to do that?
Well, okay, this is what I had to persuade Mark, right? This was sort of a little bit of history. There was this thing in California called the Zero Emissions Vehicle Mandate that required, in those days, anybody who's a high volume car manufacturer, Ford or General Motors or Toyota or whatever, to sell cars in California, they had to sell some small number of electric vehicles. And they had, just in that time frame, had managed to get that rule overturned so they didn't have to do that anymore. And they canceled all of the electric car programs, every one of them did. And in the case of General Motors, they actually took the cars back and crushed them, all of them, every single one.
What year was this? So you guys know this?
2002. Yeah.
2002.
Yeah, and just to double down on GM just for a second. So they spent a lot of money, they spent a lot of money developing the EV1, which they also threw a lot of other stuff that they had nothing to do with EVs into that program and sort of charged into that program. But they leased these cars to people, they wouldn't let them buy them. And they finally, for the first time in their history, sold into the very richest segment in California. All right, so normally, I mean, people who get rich in California don't go out and buy the latest Cadillac. They buy a Mercedes or BMW or whatever, right? But they finally had sold into that. That was who was leasing these cars.
Because there were only a few of them, and wealthy people like it.
They were also by far the best electric car that had ever been made. By far.
By far. They had done GM had actually done engineering, or had at least outsourced enough engineering that it actually was impressive.
And they created a battery and everything.
Incredible car.
Yeah.
Whereas all the other car companies who were trying to meet the compliance requirements took one of their gasoline cars and just converted it over kind of hokey to make an electric car piece of junk.
So they
built this car from scratch to be an electric car.
Yeah, so they had an actually great product that had a waiting list of people trying to get in. And when they got the zero emissions mandate, rewritten and made it so they didn't have to do those zero emission cars anymore, they canceled the leases and pulled those cars back.
Sometimes they had to send a sheriff to go take the car from people.
Yeah, and these are people in the gated communities of Atherton, and the sheriff is there trying to take their car away, and the guy's lawyer is trying to stop them. Just as an entrepreneur, and just as you think about your customers, if you have customers that love your product and are willing to hire lawyers to try to keep your product, do not send the sheriff out to take the product away and then crush it in front of them. They will never buy another product from you ever again. I mean, that's just it. Only GM could think that that was a successful marketing strategy. It's like, this.
What the automation within the California Air Resources Board to do was to instead back hydrogen fuel cell cars sometime in the future. They don't actually make anything in particular. And so I was actually interested in what was the right answer just to not use oil. But by 2002, to me, global warming was the real deal. And also the wars that we had going on at that time in the Middle East had something to do with oil. So I wanted to find something else to do that was not oil. And I didn't have an opinion about what it would be. I kind of suspected the answer was hydrogen because that's where all the car companies went. But I in order to particularly convince this guy, I built a spreadsheet where I traced the pathway for every single possible kind of fuel I could think of, whether it's oil or natural gas or coal or whatever, and then taking that and turning it into every way I can drive a car, whether it's a hybrid vehicle or a diesel engine or electric vehicle where I make electricity with coal or whatever. And I expected to see in the end that the most efficient well-to-wheel solution was going to be hydrogen, and it wasn't. In fact, hydrogen is terrible. It still is terrible. And I was surprised to see electric cars weren't just a little better, but a lot better. And he was equally surprised because he kept making me prove every bit of my numbers along the way. Like, what is the efficiency of the American electric grid? What is the efficiency of converting the crude oil into gasoline? Where'd you get that number from? I had to prove it all.
So you guys were basically challenging each other to make sure that you were stress testing the data.
Yeah, totally stress tested, yeah, and it took a while.
This is really an important thing, though, because what you don't want to do is you want to make sure that whatever your technology is or whatever you're going to use is the best possible technology for what you're going to do. It would have been terrible if we had raised money and done all this stuff and tried to launch our car and then it turned out that
Wrong technology.
Actually corn is the answer, and
if we just dove into hydrogen, for example,
or hydrogen,
disaster.
yeah, totally disaster. What was interesting is, so we had this whole, and hydrogen was a hot topic, and we had this whole part of the deck that Martin had constructed on why hydrogen is a complete disaster, and for cars at least, and about half the VCs that we would present to, and we presented to like every VC we could.
How many turned it down? I just wanted
Hundreds.
Hundreds. Yeah. we can talk about that.
Yeah, I got 100 no's before I got my first one.
Exactly. That's about right.
You guys got a lot more, so.
Well, so the thing is, though, that about half the VCs would get, they would get to that section and they would say, oh, just skip this. We know it's a scam.
Yeah.
Actually, that was the word with one of the VCs is we know hydrogen's a scam. And then the other half would get real quiet.
Because they invested in hydrogen so much.
We'd like to just keep that part of the deck. Is that okay? Because they were deep into it.
That was actually going to be one of my questions is how many no's did you get? And how many people told you it's impossible to create a battery-powered car and compete against
I mean, there's a couple sides of that. So, on the one hand, well, first of all, almost all VCs are experts on cars. And if you're not sure, then ask them, they'll tell you that. So we had a cobbled together prototype fairly early on, and every VC wanted to go for driving that thing, for sure. But in the end, persuading to invest. I mean, we had just really gotten over .com stupidity where actually making a product was maybe okay, but making a car, keep in mind, in 2002, 2003, if you look back, nobody had started a car company successfully since, I don't know what, I mean,
Saturn-ish.
well, Saturn
was a jam.
Yeah. I mean, you think back, you think about DeLorean, which failed spectacularly. You think about Tucker, which there's a movie about his failure, and nobody's ever done it. And then on top of that, everybody knew electric cars were possible because the car companies all said so. So it was tricky. So we rang every doorbell. We presented to everybody who could get to listen.
And so I want to, because we're going to run out of time, and I know we want to have you guys ask questions, and I want to. So my connection with these two is very different. It's kind of weird. So Mark is on our board of advisors for SCET, but I actually met Martin first, and that was on a long plane ride from Tokyo to San Francisco, and we happened to be sitting next to each other.
And he remembered that.
And I remember the entire 11-hour conversation, because usually I don't talk to my neighbor on a plane, but we just kind of had a conversation, it just kept going. It was the most amazing conversation, and I remember a couple of really powerful stories. And the first one, and I want both of you guys to talk about this, is about how you came up with the battery, having them in serial, the insight that you have.
I mean, this is exactly what I talked about with the e-books. We very quickly realized that electric cars live and die by the battery.
Okay, so you guys know that,
Everything else doesn't matter. And for most of it's a car, and motors, heck, I mean, the reason that I named the company Tesla Motors was because I made the technical decision early on to use a kind of motor called an induction machine instead of a permanent magnet motor. And that motor was invented by Nikola Tesla, patented by him. So that's why it's named Tesla.
And at that time, Tesla was not very well known.
Right.
And so it seemed like a
Well, it fit well, but it was also true. I mean,
It was totally true.
Yeah, but in the end, if I hadn't chosen that kind of motor, chosen a different kind, it would have worked fine. I still think I made the right choice, but that's not the big decision. It's all about the battery.
But so that battery, on the plane, I even remember you saying a battery maybe crashes, doesn't work once out of a million times. But if you individual cell, so that doesn't matter to you if you have a regular battery, because once in a million, you probably won't be one of the very few who have a battery that doesn't work. But if it's 1 in a million and there's 100 million cars out there, that means
there's 1 in a million and I have 7,000 of them in my car.
Well, but if you right, but if you only had one battery in your car, that means 100 cars are just shutting down all over the country every day, causing fatalities, right? So how did you guys solve for that?
Well, this is taking a Silicon Valley idea and bringing it to the auto industry. So the system we designed is redundant, meaning that if an individual cell within the battery pack fails, the battery still works perfectly. The driver is unaware that anything happened because they're grouped in parallel. If you lose one, it's not a big deal.
Right. So rather than one battery, you break it down into what? How many? 700?
Almost 7,000.
7,000 batteries.
Let's be careful about words here. 7,000 cells.
Okay. So if one cell were to stop working, you wouldn't even notice.
It was unnoticeable, it's barely measurable.
Right. And when you took that brilliant insight that you now taken the point of failure, which was the battery, and because you made it redundant, it would not really fail.
Which is an idea that we've done in Silicon Valley forever. I mean, just back into disk drives. You know, the disk drives fail all the time. Disk drives
So here's
fail
the
all the
connection,
time.
right?
And
Their time at the disk drives has a direct correlated connection to a Tesla car.
As does the ebook.
as does the
As the
ebook.
ebook.
Right, because when we did the ebooks, the first version used nickel metal hydride batteries, which are very simple to control, no big deal. We were fairly early in using lithium-ion batteries for our second generation product. And manufacturers of these cells were sufficiently concerned about the safety of them that they would not sell us any cells or even give us samples until our engineers had taken a class on what it takes to manage these. They're that much more complicated, right?
You had to take a class on a battery in order to even buy the battery.
Or the vendor would not sell them to us, that's right. Because they were concerned about liability. So we took the class, we learned about it. And
And you can buy anything from the dark,
And
so
you-
it's different.
Well, and you, yeah, true.
Now it's on the phone.
We needed to have a fairly sophisticated control algorithm, even when we only had just 2 of these cells in our field. And that was the question that we asked each other: does that scale? Can I take that design for 2 cells and scale that up to 7,000? And we sketched out a few architectures on, I think, literally a napkin in the coffee shop, and came up with what we believed the architecture would be, and drilled into it enough that we were convinced it would work. And what we wound up building was exactly that. It was the way we architected.
I kind of think of it as almost like the flux capacitor from Back to the Future, what you just described
So
there.
it also had another really important aspect to it. So the cells that we chose were these 18650s at the time.
About like a pen-like battery.
Yeah, it's like kind of a double A kind of thing, fat double A. And they were the only cells that were made in a huge volume because they were the standard cell.
They're in laptops, and in those days, DVDs players could shut
And there's a thing called camcorders, and they were in those too. And they made them by the billions. So they were commodity. Now it turns out they're commodity, but actually if you look at the quality of them, they vary quite a lot. So you actually really only had a couple of vendors who could make them well. But the neat thing about it is that a laptop had 3 of these things or whatever, and a camcorder had several or whatever. But a car, if we did 7,000, what that meant is that in our small volume, and it's a volume game, when you're selling 2 or 3, let's say 2,000 cars a year, each car was like 1,200 laptops. So at least. So we would suddenly become one of the bigger consumers of these cells, which meant we could actually get it at a decent price.
And you can actually just get them.
We could get them.
I flew to Japan to meet with the manufacturer of our stuff, with Samuel, those days. And he was at first, the manager, the decision maker at the company, the plant manager, was not interested in selling to us. He was like, a lot of industry is too cutthroat and this and that. It's not big, only going to sell a few cars. And I said, look, how many of your little cells do you think you can sell to each consumer today? Don't buy a laptop, don't buy a camcorder maybe. You can sell them like 10, 20, 30, 40, that kind of number of cells in their lifetime. And I'm talking about 7,000 at a crack. Can you name anything else that's going to give you a 100x increase in your market? And he thought about it and says, you're right, actually.
And it's a great thing is it turns out that if you convince even a relatively low-level salesperson that their total addressable market is actually 100, 500, or 1,000 times bigger than they're thinking, it'll go all the way to the CEO eventually. And they'll call you and say, what is this thing about this big market?
So my last question, because this is what was fascinating to me, is you guys had this insight about having these batteries in parallel, or the cells in parallel, that was I thought was the true game changers. It's to design a battery in this way rather than having one cell. When you went to the automakers to say, hey, we've got a solution for this, what was the response?
Well, most of the automakers weren't interested in hearing from us at all because they weren't invested in electric cars. But a few, not execs, but just engineers that I knew in the auto industry told me universally that lithium-ion batteries would never be used in cars because the control is too complicated. Now, of course, 100% of all electric cars use lithium-ion batteries. And all of them, the architecture is basically what we did.
In fact, even internal combustion engine sports cars use lithium-ion starter batteries now so that they can reduce the weight.
And I remember you saying that a lot of the automakers said, our design principles are that each new thing that you add to a car is a possible point of failure. And you've now added 6,999 points of failure into our car.
Right. This idea of getting reliability through redundancy was very, very foreign to the auto industry. In fact, even as I'm trying to come up with examples within their business, I struggle. Like I come up with like lug nuts. Okay, you can let one lug nut and the wheel doesn't fall off. But it's not in the mindset of an automotive engineer. At least it was not then.
So I think based on what you're saying, Jared, I think this is a big lesson I want to end with is I don't think any automaker could have created Tesla.
No. Okay.
Because it required someone who has had experience in disk drives, in e-readers, probably spent some time in Saudi Arabia, spent some time tinkering with projects. That was not happening in GM. It wasn't happening in Toyota. In fact, they needed people who weren't beholden to that design principle of adding pieces would require.
Right. I mean, Silicon Valley is a place of fast innovation, and this is what we brought to it. I don't like to get down on the automotive engineers too much because they are much more slow about what they do. They really want things much more proven and so on, and they do this for a reason, and that is the safety. Right?
Sure. But the innovation part, the safety part, we definitely.
Right, but it's hard to find that line. And I mean, I think Mark and I debate this from time to time, but when I look at what's happening in the field of autonomous cars right now, I think that the auto industry in general, including Tesla, have gone over the line on that one. I think that we are pushing an incredibly complex technical solution into the market where we've not really figured out how to do that yet. And I think there are safety issues.
Well, so I know we're going to run out of time, so I wanted to hand it to questions right now. So questions from you guys, and I'm sure someone's going to ask about that particular thing too.
So Rudy and I have microphones, so we'll go run as much as we can. So we've got 2 questions back here, and we're going to keep on having the microphones move. So here you go.
Hello. Hello, I'm Jin Chang from China. I'm currently here studying the entrepreneurship study, and I'm really excited to see you guys here today. And my question is, when you guys built the original Roadster, is there any particular reason why you guys chose to build it based on a Lotus Exige or over a Porsche or Ferrari? Or is it just because you guys mentioned earlier, because what you guys know about this company or how
it's both. It's both. So on the one hand, Lotus was a good match for us in terms of the size of business they were and their willingness to work with a small company like we were. So that's the one side, the opportunistic side. But the other side was, if you look prior to the Tesla Roadster, every electric car that had come out before was basically a piece of crap. It was like a golf cart with a fiberglass body, which were terrible cars. And everybody's opinion in those days, when people thought of electric cars, they thought of these cars that had like a 30-mile range, maybe that could go top speed 35 miles an hour. They looked like crap. They had no creature comforts, and they were terrible. And that was the expectation. And we knew that was a mistake. We felt that with the new technology, you enter the market at the top as a premium product. So we wanted to make a car. It was a real sports car that was not completely knocked out that impression of what an electric car would be. And Lotus was a perfect fit for that because they've been building real sports cars for whatever years.
One thing to remember too is that we looked at what are we bringing to the party, right? So we had ideas on how to build a really great drivetrain, how to make the car go, but the car industry has been screwing cars together for over 100 years, so they're pretty good at that part. And the idea that we could add anything of value to that particular piece of the puzzle, not only do we not have the money to do it, but even if we did, that's not our expertise. We don't know how to screw cars together, but we know how to make the drivetrain. We were pretty sure we could figure it out. So we really wanted to have a partner that could do that part of the thing. And there's all kinds of practical reasons with supply chains and everything else. And one of the issues with the Lotus is that we really wanted a car. We wanted to have some kind of base thing that would help us get to the drivetrain as quickly as possible. And it turns out Lotus could do that, but their machinery could only handle cars that look a lot like a Lotus. So the actual the width of the car is constrained by the machines that they use in the assembly. So the car couldn't be any wider. We would have loved it to be a little wider. We couldn't make it any wider. We could make it longer, but at some point it becomes like a hot dog stand. It really was long. So we did make it longer. And the neat thing is that they had some really neat technology around the chassis for the Lotuses, which was great for an electric car. Only they had frozen that technology when they released the Elise because they had to go through crash and safety again, and it was super expensive to do that. Whereas we were going to have to go through crash and safety. So our chassis is it's different, and it's assembled differently. It's made in a slightly different way, and it's a much cooler and better.
Although we did still leverage quite a bit of the crash.
Oh, but we did, yeah.
But there's another point in what you said, Mark, and that is that, especially for a startup company with limited resources, and we had limited resources, it's really important to have in your mind very clearly what are your core competencies. What are you bringing to the party that's new? And that you need to focus your energy on, and everything else, if you can outsource it, outsource it. We outsourced everything that was not drivetrain at the beginning.
Yes.
So we have a mic back there.
Yeah. Raise your hand so I can see where you are.
Oh,
Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm Toshko, a sophomore studying mechanical engineering. My question is, so you mentioned kind of at the time that making an electric car was pretty crazy. It was a crazy idea. Making a car company was also a crazy idea. So what kind of convinced you that you guys could do it, make an electric car company, succeed, take on the industry? What was the reasoning there?
Part of it is hubris or naivety. I think that a key part for any kind of interesting entrepreneur project is maybe a little bit naive about how hard it's going to be. But there's another side of it, and that was that, I was absolutely convinced through this process we described that this was the winning technology in the long run. I was convinced of it. But the other side of the coin was the companies who ought to be in that space, the ones who ought to be competition and stopping from being able to start my own company, they had very, very publicly and visibly exited that market. In my presentations to investors, I would argue that we had maybe a 5-year lead on all those guys before they would come after us. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
It's 15 years.
Yeah, we would have these board meetings, especially as the company was growing up, and the board was concerned, and Elon was on the board about once the Roadster really hits and people see it, the big guys are gonna just come after us full steam. Can we get to a higher production? Can we get to a sedan basically fast enough before they just crush us? At no time in any of those meetings did anyone say, imagine if we released the Roadster and then it took us much longer to get to the sedan than we expected, and then we began producing sedans, and then the first time that any of the car companies woke up was when we were the top-selling luxury sedan in Germany.
Yeah.
And that's when they got there. 15 years later, we just assumed that they would wake up much earlier.
So sometime after I left Tesla, I spent a couple of years working for Volkswagen, and while I was there, I ran across an internal PowerPoint presentation that they had, just for their own use, that proved that the Roadster couldn't possibly work. And I said, would you like to come drive mine? Like, no, we can prove mathematically it's not possible with mine. And my wife is a civil engineer, actually. And in her schooling, one of her classes, they passed around this white paper, an aeronautical white paper, that proved that a bumblebee cannot fly. And I think you guys are going to look around the room and ignore that because we can prove it doesn't fly. My wife saw this Volkswagen PowerPoint presentation and laughed and said, they just proved the bumblebee can't fly. Yeah. And that was the attitude we saw inside the car companies, that even when the car was in their face and they can go drive it, they would still say it's impossible.
It did help, too, that the car companies had long since refactored themselves and got rid of anything else that wasn't their core competency. And what they chose to be core was marketing and the engineering and styling to some degree, but the engineering of the internal combustion engine. So things like electronics and software they deliberately didn't do. And electric cars are only software and electronics.
So in that vein, there's the person who was the project manager of the battery for the Chevy Volt. I had heard that she had quit her job and came to Silicon Valley to work for a startup company. And I was amazed because as far as I could tell, she was at the top of her game. So I reached out to her and got her to go out lunch with me. And I asked her, why did you quit? You're like the top of your game at GM. And she says, it's the glass ceiling. And she says, it's not because I'm a woman. It's not because I'm black. It's because I have a degree in electrical engineering, and that means you can only go this high in the organization. Everything above that's mechanical engineers.
This is new information for Berkeley students because they think EECS is at the top of, there's like, the chancellor and then there's EECS majors. Yeah, so there's, just so you know, it's hierarchies change outside of it.
Well, but within the company, their old competency was, in fact, engines and transmissions and stuff like that. And for that reason, everybody in the upper management came from that background and not from double E.
We're going to question back here, and then we'll get you with white shirts.
Hello, Peter here. I'm from Norway. Back home, we're great fans of Tesla. But what everyone seems to want to get right now is an electrical boat. What do you think about electrical boats?
I've thought about them over the years quite a bit. My father was a guy who loved boats. I grew up on boats. Boats are fairly inefficient to move to the water, except for the very smallest boats. So it takes quite a bit of energy to do that. That said, I think that we will eventually get there because, on the other hand, the environmental impact of boats is pretty high. So, I think we are seeing today still gradual improvement of batteries to make it more and more possible. We may see some breakthroughs that come through that actually make it possible to put enough energy in a boat that's put down.
Yeah, and an electric boats, there's an ecosystem that's beginning to develop too. I was looking at a company the other day, and I asked, so electric boat company, I said, well, how are you going to handle the charging? Because you don't have anything in your deck about how you're going to handle the charging. And they said, we're going to use one of the electric boat charging startups that only focuses on charging at docks. And they then showed me a couple of these companies that's what they do is install electric boat chargers, which is quite a trick. High voltage water, salt water. It's like not great. Kind of scary. But there was actually 2 startups that had hundreds of installations. I was completely blown away. So we'll get there somehow.
Hi, my name is Marc Tarpenning. I study psychology and design here, and I had a curiosity about your transition from friendship to co-founders of different businesses. I was curious what made you guys both believe that the other was a good fit for a co-founder.
Sorry, say that last bit.
Why did we think we were good fits to be co-founders?
Well, of course you will. Yeah, I don't know. I grew up thinking I could do anything, but good to read engineering. No, part of it actually is I think that I found a good partner with Mark. I think that this experience we always had of challenging each other and forcing each other to prove what we believe. I think,
and we have different skills as well. We just work a little bit differently, but they're quite complementary. There was a time when we were showing some investors around, and Martin was walking across, and the investor asked, "So what? I get what do you do versus Martin, and like why? How does that work?" And at that exact moment, my cell phone rang, and I had to answer it because it was a wire transfer to allow the processing of our payroll, and you have to approve those. And I said, "Just a second, I have to answer this." And I said the secret word or whatever, and I said, "Martin is so creative and so great in so many ways, but making sometimes the trains run on time, like that's my run." And he was like, "Got it, like totally." It's true. It's quite funny.
Yeah, actually, as we've looked at startup companies since then, we kind of looked for that chemistry.
And actually, having a co-founder is super important because startups are incredibly manic depressive. Like there are days when you know that you're going to take over the world, and there's days that you're doing the stupidest thing you've ever. This is the end. It
really is like that every time.
And it's great to be out of phase enough so that I'd come back and go, what am I doing? And Martin would be like, we're going to take over the world. This is great. That was super helpful. Yeah.
Good.
Hi, my name is Kiki Wong. I'm a
Hello. I'm Kiki Wong. I'm a business and environmental econ major, and my question is about the lithium-ion batteries, and because that's such a precious mineral that's used in all technology and software, and because of the capacity that we have in the world, where do you think that challenge is going to be once that resource diminishes?
So two things. First of all, lithium is not a scarce resource. Do you know what the atomic number is for lithium? Where it is on the periodic table?
Yeah.
It's 3. It's hydrogen, helium, lithium. It's a really, really common element in the universe, including here. It turns out that it's so common that there are places like, for example, in South America, where there's almost pure lithium salt laying on the ground and you can scoop it up and use it almost as is. Now that will run out of, but the ocean is full of it too, and we can filter it out. That's the first point. Second point is that unlike oil, you know, when we extract oil from the ground, we turn it to gas, and we burn it, it's gone. Whereas at the end of life, the lithium-ion battery still has every single lithium atom in it that it started with. It didn't go anywhere. It's all there. So it's all recyclable. We don't yet have the infrastructure to do lithium-ion recycling. But part of the reason for that is there aren't that many worn-out lithium-ion batteries yet. I mean, the cars are all fairly young. But just as a comparison, when I was a kid, it was not uncommon to see a lead acid, like a car starter battery, lying on the curb or somewhere where somebody threw it out. And you never see that anymore, never. And the reason is that we passed regulations that made it a law that if you're going to sell car batteries, you also are required to give people $20 for a dead one, right? So they get recycled now nearly 100%. If you have a car, the starter battery in your car, that lead in there, 90, I forget the exact number, but 98 or whatever percent of that lead came from old car batteries. Right?
It's actually circular.
And batteries
don't
are
get
the same
consumed.
thing.
Yeah. And then for the rare earths like cobalt and nickel, especially cobalt, which is unfortunately, you know, relatively rare and confined to places which are not politically that stable, the amount is vanishingly small, and again, never is consumed.
And to be fair, the steel in your engine is made with cobalt.
Right.
Cobalt steel.
Yeah.
And also, one more point is that these elements that are in the batteries, they don't have to be there, particularly the cobalt and manganese and so on. There are lots of different chemistries to make the batteries, and they have been evolving over time, and they will continue to do so based on what works and what's economically feasible.
The non-cobalt batteries now, which have less energy density, they have the same energy density as the cobalt batteries, the high energy density batteries did 10 years ago. So I mean, like we're getting better at making them. And again, they're 100% recyclable. In fact, Redwood Materials, which is founded by our former CTO, it's all about battery recycling because we're finally having enough batteries to recycle. They're just barely there.
Yeah. But it's a good question, and we need to pay attention to whatever we go. Have you seen a book called Cradle to Cradle?
No, I'm not.
I recommend it. It's by a guy named McDonough, I think his name is. He's an architect, but he put forward this idea of when you design anything, like a chair or whatever, that is designed in a way that at the end of its life, it can be torn apart to constituent materials, and those can be used to make the same thing again. So, for example, Herman Miller makes chairs that we see in our office all the time, and when he worked with them, originally the chair had something like 15 or 20 different kinds of material in it. And when they redesigned the chair, it only had 4 or 5 different materials on the chair, and they were designed so they came apart really easily. And then you could use those as raw materials to build new chairs. It's cradle to cradle instead of cradle to grave. I recommend the book if you want to read something interesting.
Where's the mic? So we know it's you.
Yeah, so my name is Josh Jane and I'm a computer science major. And my question was, when starting Tesla, how far out did you scope the business when it comes to the Roadster, the Model S, the Model X? Or was your approach more to tackle the problem and then ideate ideas for future cars at a later time?
So in the broad strokes, we did exactly find it out. We thought we could build a brand and change people's opinion with the Roadster, and then from there move into markets that have a broader appeal. We actually thought the next vehicle might either be an SUV or a big sedan, and after that a more affordable car. But that's as far as we went on that. We knew that it was possible. We knew that was the direction we wanted to go. So we did not have the resources to do any engineering on those vehicles at all.
And part of that is just to see, when that product came out, just what the market was going to tell us was next. The sedan market or the SUV market is like, I don't know, 10 or 100 times bigger than the sports car market. So if you want to get, 100 times. So if you want to get into volume, we knew we had to get there eventually. How we got there was not in the original plan. It was like, yeah, we're going to get the Roadster out. It's going to be a huge success. And we want to get into a higher volume car, which, maybe it's pickup trucks. I mean, we didn't really know.
Well, if you look at our business plan, we actually did say.
Well, we did say sedans.
But it's also, I think, important that we deliberately got into the market in a place that was a niche market because we were not going to be able to build very many cars anyways. We didn't have the resources to do that. So, we entered the market at a size that was big enough to grow the company, but not so big that we would show some other company how to do it and they would take our market away from us. So it's important to have a good match between the market size and what you're able to build.
I think we can take about 2 more questions. I know we have more than that. Got one back. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brandon and I'm studying business. And I'm curious what factors, maybe on the more managerial or cultural side, led to Tesla's early success, especially in the face of other competitors.
Well, I mean, the great thing for us at that point was there were no competitors. I mean, there really weren't any.
Aptera.
Yeah, there were a couple of like wacky companies trying to do this or that that made no sense, but there essentially were no competitors. So, I mean, the right business decision was at the very beginning when we realized that we could enter this market. Our engineering sense convinced us it was feasible, and the companies that ought to be our competitors weren't. Right. So that gave us some room to make mistakes. We could be late to the product, we could be over budget and all that, and we'd still get there.
I would say also one of the things that really helped us was having a mission. Like, it wasn't just the next shiny thing. We just weren't making sports cars for rich people. We were going to change the energy equation, of the country, and that was incredibly important, both from, obviously a carbon perspective, but also a national security perspective. And literally, we were able to hire people that we could never have afforded before, but because they believed in the mission.
Right, and when things got tough, I mean, every now and then I would give a talk to the company and remind everybody while we were there, why we were there, what we were solving. It's not just making another shiny thing.
I remember like driving to work one day and in my internal combustion engine car, because we didn't have electric cars at the time. And I'm driving there, and it was the latest data that was being reported out of the Arctic, and the incredible, melting that's going on. And I just thought, oh my God, I've got to do something about this. I said, I just have to get to work. That's right. I just have to go this next mile and a half, and I'm going to be actually doing something about that. And that really did help. So I mean, we're actually, especially we really do believe in mission makes a difference.